If you only had 2 exercises to maintain strength for life, these are powerful options: the Sumo deadlift and Zercher squat. Our idea is simple. Strength is a mother of quality. Once you build strength, everything else becomes easier.
Strength has to be your priority. Once you're stronger, everything becomes easier. So you find several exercises that you enjoy that don't hurt you. You have the equipment available. Intensity in strength training is just how heavy the weight is. It has nothing to do with the effort. If you have to get a heavy bag of groceries or something, you got a deadlift. Narrow sumo deadlift, Zercher squat. Gripping tighter, you are instantly increasing your strength in anything that you do. A very simple protocol would be a set every 10 minutes. Strength, it is the mother of all qualities, but that's not the end all for everybody.
What movements, if they exist, all people should include in their weekly routine someplace when thinking about how to develop, perhaps maintain, but for most people it's going to be goal of still achieving some strength increase?
I think there has to be a very low quantity of exercises, just very few exercises you want to focus on. I'm going to give you some options to choose from. So what we try to do at Strong First in my company, my School of Strength, is we try to provide people with various simple, very low-tech, high-concept ways of addressing, reaching their needs. Because for one reason or another, for this individual, the barbell is the preferred tool. For another, it's the kettlebell or body weight or something else. So I'm not going to say that if you don't do kettlebell swings or barbell squats, you'll never amount to anything. That's just not true. You can pick some events. You definitely ought to do something for your posterior chain. You absolutely do. If we are looking at the barbell, I would start out with narrow sumo deadlift.
So this is narrow grip, but
not narrow grip, pardon me, but your stance is just wide enough to let your arms through. Your arms stay parallel to each other. So you just find a very comfortable stance for yourself. Professor McGill has been in your podcast. He explained to you about different hip architecture and so on. So you have to find whatever works for you. And when people talk about functional strength training and then they start standing on a ball and juggle oranges, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because that doesn't look like my life or yours probably, right? But if you have to get a heavy bag of groceries or something, you got a deadlift. And the narrow sumo deadlift, so if you look at powerlifters, the classic example would be Ed Cohn, narrow stance sumo. I'm not talking about wide sumo. That's a very sport-specific event. You practice that first. You learn how to hip hinge. It's extremely important to learn how to hip hinge. Again, Stuart stressed that how important it is for your back health and for your longevity. So you learn to do that. But then whether you decide to pursue the deadlift or not, if you decide not to pursue high numbers in the deadlift, maybe it's not appropriate for you, or maybe you like in the coaching. Fantastic exercise for everybody is a Zercher squat. In the Zercher squat, you hold the bar like this in the crooks of your elbows. So it's resting right here. It's possible to pick it up off the ground, but it's an advanced skill. Better just to walk it off the rack. The advantage of the Zercher squat over, let's say, the back squat or the front squat is even if you have messed up shoulders, wrists, elbows, you still can do that. Coaching the Zercher squat is very easy, very simple. And you have tremendous reflexive stabilization of your midsection. It's just very, very powerful. So you acquire that skill of getting tight. Getting high numbers on that exercise in the Zercher. So let's say an athlete could shoot for double body weight. That's a really good goal.
And the bar, for those listening, not watching,
right here,
is cradled in the crooks of the elbows.
Correct.
In front of the body. Are the arms crossed?
You can hold them like this. You can hold them like this, or different ways of holding them. You definitely would want to get proper coaching. You don't want to bruise yourself. You want to be comfortable. You want to do it right. But doesn't take a lot of skill to do that. You find some pressing exercise. And again, if we're sticking with the example of the barbell, the bench press has gotten bad reputation, thanks to the gym bros. All gym bros do is the bench pretty much. Well, these days they also check out their phones, I guess.
Every set, between every set. The 11th rep, I joke. People checking their phones.
Yeah, there we go. But if you look at athletes who also do some lower body work, some posterior chain, and something for the midsection, and again, the Zercher squat could address that, they are making a great use of the bench press. So it's a very simple exercise, a relatively simple exercise. Unlike other pressing exercises, it allows you to make strength gains with a very low volume of training. So you can do several sets of 5 once a week in the bench press and keep getting stronger. Good luck doing that in the overhead press or in the one-arm push-up or something like that. So those are just a couple examples. There are many other examples. You can do snatch grip deadlifts. The list is very, very long. We can address the same thing in the same way with kettlebells. You can look at the body weight exercises, but you need to find several exercises that have a reputation for building strength that reaches beyond the ability to do this exercise. If you just do curls, you're going to get better at curls, but not at much else. Canadian scientists back in the 80s, Dubussel and his team made some interesting discoveries. And again, they just found that doing something like extension is not going to carry over to the squat. It's just not. The coordination is so radically different. So you find several exercises that you enjoy, that don't hurt you, that you have the equipment available, that you got the proper coaching for, and you pretty much stick with it. And there's absolutely no reason for you to change these exercises. It's possible to change them on the margins, from a wide grip bench press to narrow grip bench press, squats with a pause, and so on and so forth. But you don't really have to do a great variety of things. Variety, it's a good topic. We can discuss this later. But looking at the example of weightlifting, as much as we can find many reasons why variety could be beneficial, improve neuroplasticity, reduced risk of repeated strain injury, and so on. But there's always the statistics in weightlifting. There's no correlation between the number of exercises and platform results. And for people outside the sports, it's going to be the same. So find this limited battery of exercises that you can do well, you can do pain-free, and just enjoy them for years.
How do you think about this thing we call fitness?
Strength is the mother quality of all the other qualities. So this is, again, it's a statement by Professor Matveev, Leonid Matveev, going way back. Without a foundation of strength, you cannot build anything. So any athletic event requires a base of strength. Of course, that shot putter is going to need much more strength than triathlon athlete. They all need strength. Speaking of which, in triathlon, in marathon running, in distance, in cycling, it's been proven that putting athletes on heavy, low repetition strength regimen, the kind that doesn't really add muscle but just makes you stronger neurologically, it makes them race faster. Once you're stronger, everything becomes easier. How much stronger you need to get, that will vary. In the Soviet Union, they had something called the model athlete. So they figured out that for every particular event, your odds of succeeding are going to be much higher if you're able to, squat this much or bench this much and jump this high and so on and so forth. And this is easy enough to find these numbers for your individual sport and talk to various coaches. For people who are not competitive athletes, who just want to enjoy life, you just need to think about having a reserve of strength for whatever it is that you might do. Look at some PT standards, let's say in the military or in law enforcement, and possibly apply them to yourself. I don't want to impose my set of standards because there are many different, I might prefer, pull-ups and X and Y and Z, but if we're looking at strength as the foundation for general physical preparation, so there's such a thing as general strength preparation, that's part of that. There's also, special strength, which is sport-specific work, that's different. And there are different ways of getting this done. As you and I know that certain exercises are going to have a great carryover outside these particular exercises. As long as you're mobile, as long as you're symmetrical, and those are the things you have to address first, you need to look into work of Greg Cook, for example, then strength has to be your priority. Once you have reached a certain level of strength that's appropriate for your sport or appropriate for your lifestyle, at that point you can just maintain it and focus on other qualities. Give you an example. Soviet scientists, they measured a number of athletes in 20 different sports, athletes of different levels. So they evaluated various quality. One was absolute strength, another was rate of force development, pretty much power. And the third is the rate of muscular relaxation. So how quickly the muscle can relax after contraction, which is very, very important. And they have found that strength grew just very little from the intermediate level to the advanced level. There's not a lot of improvement. Power increased a little bit more, but the speed of relaxation is just shot up as the athlete became more advanced. So it's, again, strength, it is the mother of all qualities, but that's not the end all for everybody. So reach the level that is appropriate for your sport or activity, then just maintain it efficiently and focus on something else. If we talk about strength.
What about specialized training for grip strength? If somebody's large, if they can squat 500 pounds, they can deadlift 600 pounds, I don't really care. If the question is, can you open the pickle jar?
Sure.
This is a critical
I just get my
home
wife
test.
to do it. So it's grip strength is extremely important, and you being a neuroscientist, you know the disproportional representation in the motor cortex of your gripping muscles and the forearm and everything.
Grip strength is not magic, but it is a strong mark of overall strength, health, and aging.
There is another reason why grip is so important. If you make a fist, if you make a very tight fist, you're going to feel overflow of tension, irradiation going to other muscles. Gripping tighter, you are instantly increasing your strength in anything that you do. So a very simple example for your listeners. Pedestrian exercise like curls. Do as many strict reps as you possibly can the way you normally do them, and then start just crushing that bar or that dumbbell or whatever that you're curling. You will immediately be able to knock out several more reps. So that makes you so much stronger. And again, the value of a strong wrist and grip is obviously very important. A stronger grip is going to make us live longer. Statistically, it's worth a try, right? Mm-hmm. One can either find exercises that train the grip in the context of developing something else, or train the grip directly. So either way is great. So the first examples would be climbing the rope or doing pull-ups and weighted pull-ups on a rope. That's a great way to train, obviously. So what you do, the way you program it is, let's say once a week you climb the rope and a couple of days a week you do pull-ups. That's a good way to go about it. And you don't need to do anything else. And another example would be some exercises like the kettlebell snatch. When you start snatching a heavy kettlebell and you drop it from overhead, that eccentric loading is very, very powerful. And that develops grip very, very well. Strength is a skill. Two interesting things happened in the 50s. One is Thomas Rush. He was an American exercise physiologist. He proposed that strength adaptation was largely skill. He looked at pretty much the adaptations. He noticed that there's no correlation between the muscle growth and strength. At the same time, a Soviet scientist, Stepanov was his last name, he was measuring the electrical activity in the muscles of weightlifters who were pressing overhead. And back then, the press was one of the competition events. As the athletes got stronger, after some months, the EMGs started dropping off when they're lifting the same weights. So pretty much he found out that the nervous system activity became more economical. They were able to try less hard, yet still lift the same weight. Or they could try harder and lift even heavier weights. And hypertrophy could not explain that because in the 50s, the Soviets were very anti-hypertrophy. They were just doing doubles, triples, singles pretty much. The Hebbian mechanisms, every time that you activate a particular connection, synaptic connection, between the neurons, that connection becomes stronger. So if you do it over and over and over. The grease to groove is the analogy is that command that's coming in from your brain to your muscles, that's the groove. That's that pathway. And the more you use it, pretty much the more greased it becomes. So it's like becomes a superconductor. So in the future, you don't have to try as hard to lift the same amount of weight, or you can try the same amount and you can lift harder. So we haven't even addressed the neural drive yet. We just pretty much made the motor neurons more responsive to it. It's a very easy and very simple way to train. Strength comes very easily and very, very unexpectedly. Make sure that it does happen. You have to address the issue of specificity. So specificity pretty much means without getting too much into the weeds. To get stronger, first of all, you need to lift weights that are heavy enough. If you're looking about percentages of 1 rep max, we're looking at like 75 to 85. Typically. If you go too light, you don't make the impression on your nervous system and it's just not specific enough. If you go too heavy, very quickly you're just gonna burn yourself out. So pretty much like it's a weight that's heavy enough to respect and light enough not to fear. And the second of all, and this is very surprising, is you only do about half or fewer reps that you possibly could do. So for example, let's say that you're lifting 80% of your 1 rep max. And let's say that you're able to do 8 reps maximum. We're just fairly count. Well, you're only going to do about 3 to 4 reps per set. And that's it. And the gym bros at this point go crazy, like, where's the intensity? Intensity in strength training is just how heavy the weight is. It has nothing to do with the effort. And it's been proven over and over that's much more important than how hard you're exerting yourself. There are times for that. There are absolutely times for that. But if the weight is heavy enough, and if you do half the repetitions that you possibly could do, you're going to get stronger. It's very safe. You're not going to burn out psychologically, and it's also very easy on your body. Also, that builds muscle as well, purely because you're able to do a very high volume of work. I'm not able to explain the mechanism, why it builds muscle, but as the Soviets found out in weightlifting research, there's a correlation between the volume, Robert Roman, between the volume and the hypertrophy, everything else being equal, you're going to get bigger. Almost every day, you're doing the sets of 3-4 reps, maybe even 5, and they start adding up. And before you know it, you're stronger, and at the same time, you have developed muscle. So to summarize the grease to groove, you're trying to train moderately heavy as often as possible while staying as fresh as possible. If you decide to do it in the gym, a very simple protocol would be a set every 10 minutes. It sounds really bizarre. Like, why? Why would you rest for so long?
One set every 10 minutes sounds strange, but the goal is not fatigue. The goal is repeated high-quality practice.
This apparently has to do with initial memory consolidation. There's so much is still unknown. So we do know the grease to groove works great, but we speculate that some of it has to do with some of the same phenomena related to learning in other fields. If you're doing something over and over, like you're saying 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4, you're just using your short-term memory. You're not memorizing anything. But if you say 2 + 2 is 4, you go get a coffee, you come back and you try 2 + 2, 4. So there's that desirable difficulty that you have in there, and you have to process that instead of just go through the groove. That apparently helps this adaptation. So rest for at least 10 minutes. Do sets of about the repetitions of half of what you're possibly able to do. Listen to your body. Typically train 2-3 days in a row and then take a day off, but listen to your body. Incidentally, this grease to groove is the topic of my next book. If you look at Hungarian professor's last name.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So he's talking about that perfect challenge, perfect practice lies in that channel between boredom and anxiety. So if you put yourself in that channel, and if you keep lifting this moderately very heavy weights with a moderate effort over and over and over, you're going to get strong. It's one of the many ways to get strong.
Are you doing anything in the rest periods between these 10 minutes? Let's say bench press, wait 10 minutes till you bench press again, but in the meantime, you're doing Zercher squat 5 minutes after the first bench press?
That's one of the ways to do that. You can do up to 3 exercises at the same time. So let's say like Zercher squat and bench press and maybe a third thing, but I'd say those two are enough. Another option is you can do that. You can incorporate this into, if you would do only one exercise, you can squeeze it into your lifestyle or your athletic practice. So for example, let's say you're teaching track practice or martial arts class, and every 10 minutes on the clock, you just have the class drop and do 3 hard, let's say 3 one-arm push-up, okay, and then get back to the class. So there's no interference whatsoever. In fact, it's better than no interference. Back in the 60s, Soviets found out something called strength after effect. So if you do strength work that's not exhausting in nature and that's not novel to you, it has a tonic effect. Anything that you can do with your brain or with your body, anything. What they would even do, some coaches, they would do so-called strength warm-up, let's say, track practice. Then they would do, let's say, 3 sets of 3 or something like with 80% max, which is not much. They start their practice. Then the coach noticed that the athletes are starting to droop a little. He'll repeat that, he might repeat that up to 3 times. So what you have is by having this short, a very small dose, like a nano practice of strength, you rejuvenate yourself and your productivity increases so much. So whether you want to just do the strength exercise, several of them in that 1 hour period, or whether you want to combine that with writing a great American novel, that's your business.